and so another day passed at the office. "Nice to meet you, I'm Olivia, and today I'm being tortured by a sudden crush on my boss who, by the way, is married." The irony wasn't lost on me. Me, so proper, so ethical, always so aware of my boundaries, falling for someone I could never have. Not that he knew, and I made sure to keep it that way. Deep down, I knew it was just a foolish illusion, but still, every time Ethan Walker walked into the room with that charming smile and that voice that seemed to wrap every word in kindness, my heart faltered. He had no idea how his mere presence affected my heartbeat. He couldn't imagine that my days began and ended with the sound of his firm footsteps echoing down the hall as he arrived and left. I hated this vulnerability. It was as if I had lost control of myself, and none of it made sense. After all, I knew who he was. Ethan Walker, the relentless businessman, the devoted husband of the flawless Samantha Walker. Samantha. Beautiful, sophisticated, always one step ahead in perfection. She wasn't just a wife. She was an untouchable figure, like one of those women you only see in fashion magazines. The kind of woman who makes you wonder how she manages to be so flawless all the time. Beside her, I felt plain, ordinary, invisible. I swallowed hard, trying to push those thoughts away. My job was to organize Ethan's schedule, manage his meetings, and keep everything running smoothly. I was good at it. No one could ever say otherwise. And above all, I was professional. I wouldn't let my feelings interfere. Never. I rested my chin on my hand, watching through the glass as he discussed a contract with his partners in the conference room. He gestured with confidence, a slight smile on his lips. Everything about him seemed so effortless, so natural. My eyes couldn't look away. When I realized what I was doing, I mentally scolded myself. How pathetic was I? "Olivia, do you have a minute?" His deep voice sounded behind me, and I nearly spilled my coffee. I turned quickly, finding Ethan himself standing at my desk. "Of course, Mr. Walker." The formal tone was almost mechanical. It was automatic by now, a form of self-preservation. He smiled, that disarming smile that revealed his perfect row of white teeth. My stomach twisted. "You can call me Ethan, you know that." I knew, but I couldn't. It was a way to keep my distance, to constantly remind myself of who he was and what he could never be to me. "All right, Ethan." His name slipped from my lips like a forbidden secret. I hated myself for it. "What do you need?" "I need to reschedule the board meeting for tomorrow. Samantha wants me to accompany her to a charity event tonight," he explained, glancing at his phone, distracted. Of course she did. It was always like that. Samantha accompanied him to every important event, always together, like the perfect couple everyone admired. A pang of bitterness shot through me, but I forced a smile. "No problem. I'll take care of it." I responded efficiently. He looked up, as if only then he truly saw me. His blue eyes locked on mine a second longer than necessary. "You're amazing, Olivia. I don't know what I'd do without you around here." And then he smiled again, sincerely, gratefully. My heart stumbled, and I had to grip the desk to avoid showing the effect he had on me. "Just doing my job," I murmured, looking away before he could notice anything. He laughed softly, a deep sound that echoed in my mind even after he walked away. I watched him head back to his office, feeling ridiculous for letting myself be affected so easily. I was so lost in my thoughts that I almost didn't notice Rachel approaching. My best friend and coworker leaned against my desk, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "You're blushing, Olivia. He complimented you again, didn't he?" I rolled my eyes, trying to ignore the heat in my cheeks. "You're imagining things." Rachel laughed. "Oh, please. You think I don't notice the way you look at him? By the way, he seemed pretty happy to spend the evening with his wife, huh?" I didn't like the tone in her voice, but But Rachel was right. I was torturing myself over someone who probably didn't even know I existed outside of work. To him, I was just efficient Olivia, always ready to organize his chaotic schedule and ensure his appointments were met. I sighed, trying to ease the tightness in my chest. I had to stop this. It made no sense to pine for someone who would never be mine. When the workday finally ended, I was exhausted, both mentally and emotionally. I was determined to go home and forget about Ethan for a few hours, but fate had other plans. I decided to stop at a restaurant to pick up dinner. It was a small, cozy place I frequented for its simple, delicious food. But as soon as I walked in, my eyes locked on a scene I could never have anticipated. Samantha was there, sitting in a secluded corner, leaning in close to a man who was definitely not her husband. They were so close, whispering and laughing as if sharing an intimate secret. His hands touched hers with familiarity, and Samantha smiled in a way I'd never seen her smile with Ethan. Shock hit me like a wave. My body froze, and the world around me seemed to blur. The perfect wife. The untouchable woman. She was cheating on Ethan. I swallowed hard, my stomach churning with the revelation. My eyes couldn't look away from that scene, and a mix of indignation and pain shot through me. I knew I should leave, but my legs wouldn't move. How could I tell him? And worse, what did this mean for me? A sharp pain spread through my chest, and all I could think about was the cruel irony of it all. Me, in love with the man who had always been faithful to his wife, while she betrayed him without a second thought. I needed to breathe. I needed to get out of there. But more than that, I needed to decide what to do with this secret now burning in my mind. The image of Samantha leaning so intimately toward that man wouldn't leave my mind. I replayed that scene over and over, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every detail haunted me. The easy smile, the familiar way they touched, the look of complicity. She was cheating on Ethan, and I was the only one who knew. I lay in bed that night, staring at the dark ceiling while guilt consumed me. I hadn't done anything wrong, but the weight of the truth was overwhelming. Ethan trusted me. He always said I was his pillar of trust, his rock amidst the chaos of the company. How could I look him in the eye now, knowing something he didn't? I closed my eyes, trying to quiet my mind, but Samantha's voice echoed in my head, sweet and melodic, dripping with falsehood. I hated her for her betrayal, but more than that, I hated what it did to me. Part of me wanted to tell Ethan, to open his eyes to what was happening behind his back. The other part knew it could destroy him. What if he didn't believe me? What if he thought I was trying to manipulate him, to ruin his marriage out of jealousy? The thought made me nauseous. I could never forgive myself if he thought I was capable of something so cruel. The next day, I went to work with dark circles under my eyes and a lump in my throat that wouldn't go away. I tried to act normal, doing my job with the same efficiency as always, but my mind was elsewhere. When Rachel approached me at lunchtime, with her usual curious expression, I knew I couldn't hide it much longer. "You look awful, Olivia. Did something happen?" I hesitated for a second. I trusted Rachel. She had been my best friend since we started working together at the company, and she was always the voice of reason when I needed advice. If anyone could help me think clearly, it was her. "I saw something last night," I began, keeping my voice low as I absent-mindedly pushed my salad around on my plate. Something I shouldn't have seen. Rachel raised her eyebrows, leaning in closer. "You're going to leave me hanging like that? What did you see?" I took a deep breath. The words came out before I could stop them. I saw Samantha with another man. They were together, in a way she shouldn't be with anyone other than Ethan. Rachel's eyes widened. She looked around quickly, making sure no one was listening. "Are you sure about that?" I nodded, the memory burning like fire. I saw it clearly. They were holding hands, laughing, way too close. It was obvious what was going on. Rachel let out a sigh, crossing her arms. Her face was full of concern. "That's complicated. Are you going to tell him?" That was the exact question that had kept me up all night. I didn't know the answer, and the dilemma continued to torture me. If I told him, Ethan would be devastated. If I stayed silent, I'd be letting the lie continue. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice more fragile than I intended. "If I tell him, he might not believe me. He might think I'm making it up out of, I don't know, jealousy. Or he might believe me, and it could destroy his marriage." Rachel looked at me with an unusual seriousness. "You know that if you tell him, it's going to change everything, right? Your relationship with him, your job, your life, everything's going to change." Reality crashed down on me like an avalanche. I was trapped in a moral dilemma with no easy way out. If I stayed silent, I'd feel like an accomplice to the betrayal. If I spoke up, I could destroy Ethan and end up being misunderstood. Rachel took my hand, her touch warm and comforting. "I know you want to protect him, but it's his marriage, Olivia. It's not your place to interfere. You're just his secretary, as painful as that is to admit." Just his secretary. The words echoed inside me, raw and painful. Rachel was right. I was nobody in Ethan's personal life. My feelings didn't matter. I had no right to get involved. I swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in my throat. My heart ached, torn between wanting to protect Ethan and the fear of hurting him even more. "So, you think I should stay quiet?" Rachel nodded slowly. "Yes, and I know it's going to eat you up inside, but it's the best choice. Ethan will find out eventually. The truth always comes out. You just need to stay out of it when it does." I looked down, my eyes fixed on the worn wooden table. I wanted so badly to believe that silence was the right path, but the image of Samantha betraying Ethan kept burning in my mind. How could I keep looking at him every day, knowing that? Rachel squeezed my hand before letting out a heavy sigh. "I know it's not what you wanted to hear, but it's what you need to do. You're only going to get hurt if you try to be the hero in this story." I wanted to argue, wanted to fight against that advice, but Rachel's words made sense. I was just an employee, a woman in love with the wrong man. And in the end, maybe silence was the only thing I could really give. But even as I agreed with Rachel, something inside me resisted. I knew that sooner or later, I would have to make a decision. And no matter what I chose, someone was going to get hurt. I just didn't know who it would be yet. I never imagined that unspoken words could weigh so much. The secret burned inside me, twisting like a caged animal, begging to be released. Every time I looked at Ethan, the knot in my throat tightened, becoming almost unbearable. He didn't know. He had no idea his wife was betraying him, that his trust was being shattered behind his back. And I was there, pretending everything was fine, helping him plan meetings, organizing his life while carrying this terrible truth. I spent days trying to ignore the dilemma, following Rachel's advice, staying focused on my work. But the more I tried to move on, the harder it became. My eyes kept searching for signs that he knew, some hint of suspicion or pain. Nothing. Ethan was the same. Thoughtful, kind, unreachable. And it broke me a little more every day. I decided I couldn't go on like this. I had to tell him. I had to release the truth before it consumed me. If Ethan didn't believe me, if he hated me for it, at least I would know I did the right thing. With that resolve, I went to his office the next morning. My hands were shaking as I knocked on the glass door, feeling my heart race. "Come in." His voice sounded firm, familiar, but I couldn't find comfort in it like before. I opened the door and walked in, closing it behind me. Ethan was sitting at his desk, focused on some papers, but he looked up when he saw me. His blue eyes met mine, warm, trusting, breaking my heart before I even said a word. "Olivia, is something wrong?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. How could I tell him this? How could I hurt him so much? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I need to talk to you. It's about Samantha. Her name was hard to say, like spitting out a thorn. Ethan frowned, straightening in his chair. "What about Samantha?" I opened my mouth, but before I could say anything, Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his face contorting with pain. I froze, not understanding what was happening. "I found out," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I found out about the other man." The ground seemed to collapse beneath my feet. My lips parted, but no sound came out. He knew? Ethan let out a heavy sigh, looking away toward the window. His expression was devastated, the pain evident in every line of his face. "They'd been seeing each other for months," he continued, his voice low and bitter. "And I was the last to know. How could I have been so stupid?" I wanted to say something, to comfort him, but the words were stuck in my throat. The relief of not having to tell him the truth was immediately replaced by a deep pain at seeing him so shattered. "Ethan, I'm so sorry," was all I could manage to say. The words felt empty, useless. He laughed bitterly, a hollow sound that made me shiver. I should have known. All those nights she had charity events. How could I have been so blind? Guilt hit me like a punch to the stomach. I realized in that moment that Ethan didn't need the truth. He needed someone to stand by him while his world fell apart. And I couldn't tell him that I already knew. Not now. Not when he was already so broken. He rubbed his face with his hands, trying to hide the tears forming in his eyes. I had never seen Ethan so vulnerable. He was always the pillar of strength, the unshakable leader. But now, he was shattered, and my heart broke for him. I stepped closer, my instinct to protect him taking over. "Ethan, this isn't your fault. You trusted her, because you loved her. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human." He looked at me, surprised by my firmness. For a moment, I thought I'd gone too far, but then he let out a heavy sigh, as if releasing a weight he'd been carrying for too long. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft. I think I needed to hear that. I smiled, my heart pounding, wanting to say so many things that stayed trapped in my throat. But instead I just nodded, because in the end, I was still just the secretary, just the shoulder he leaned on. And even so, I would continue being everything he needed. Silently, invisibly, even if it meant continuing to go unnoticed. I never knew silence could say so much. In the weeks that followed, the words I didn't speak hung between us like a ghost, haunting every look, every conversation. Ethan was broken. I saw it in his slumped posture, in the faded smile he forced in meetings, in the way he ran his hand through his hair, restless, lost in thoughts I couldn't heal. I watched him from a distance, desperately trying to find ways to help. He didn't talk much about the divorce, but the marks were there, deep and visible. He was working too much, trying to escape the pain. And I wanted to be the comfort he needed, even if he never noticed. So I started acting. Small gestures, almost insignificant, but I hoped they would make some difference. I arrived early to organize his desk, making sure everything was impeccable before he walked in. I made his coffee exactly how he liked it, strong, no sugar. I brought his documents in order and coordinated his schedule to minimize his stress. "You're spoiling the boss too much," Rachel commented one day, giving me a curious look as I carried fresh coffee to his office. "You're going to end up ruining him." I shrugged, trying to sound casual. "He's going through a tough time. I just want to help." Rachel narrowed her eyes, a mischievous smile appearing. "Help, huh? Are you sure you're not expecting anything in return?" Her comment hit me hard. I wanted to deny it, to say I was just being kind, but the truth was much more complicated. I didn't expect anything in return, but I wished for it. I wished he would see me, that he would realize I was there, that I had always been there. But I couldn't admit that, not even to myself. "He needs someone right now," was all I could say. Rachel studied me for a moment before letting out a resigned sigh. "You're too good for this world, Olivia. Just don't let him break your heart." Too late, I thought, but I didn't say it out loud. I continued my silent gestures, trying to walk the fine line between professionalism and personal care. I listened when he vented about the lawyers, about the painful conversations with Samantha, about the sense of betrayal that kept him awake at night. Every time he spoke of her, a piece of me died a little, but I never let it show. I just listened, offered words of comfort, put my own pain aside to carry a little of his. Ethan seemed grateful, but I knew he didn't see beyond the surface. To him, I was the loyal secretary, the indispensable assistant, the person who was there to keep him functioning. Nothing more. That started to eat away at me. I wanted to be more. I wanted him to see the woman behind the efficiency, the heart that beat for him. But every time he smiled, that sad and distant smile, I knew he was still trapped by Samantha. One particularly difficult afternoon, Ethan showed up at my desk, looking exhausted. The dark circles under his eyes were deeper, his shoulders slumped as if he were carrying the weight of the world. "Olivia, can you reschedule my meeting with the investors? I'm not in the right state of mind to handle it today." "Of course," I responded promptly, already typing the email to reschedule. "Are you okay?" He sighed, running his hands over his face. "Just one of those days." I wanted to ask more, to find out how to help him, but I held back. Instead, I offered a gentle smile. "How about some coffee? Strong enough to chase away any dark clouds." A corner of his mouth lifted in an almost smile. "You're an angel, you know that?" My heart faltered, but I forced myself to keep my composure. "Just doing my job," I lied, trying to ignore the pain of those words. I went to the office kitchen, preparing the coffee with great care, as if the simple act of making it could ease some of Ethan's pain. When I returned, he was leaning against the window, looking out at the city below, so distant that for a moment I thought he hadn't heard me come back. "Here you go, extra strong, just the way you like it." He turned around, taking the cup from my hands. Our fingers brushed for a brief second, and the warmth of that spark almost made me pull back. But Ethan seemed oblivious, so consumed by his own pain that I doubted he felt the same. "Thanks, Olivia," he murmured, bringing the cup to his lips. I watched as he took the first sip, his eyes closing for a second in relief. "You always know what I need." I smiled, my lips curving involuntarily. "I try." He moved away from the window, walking toward his desk with a distant look. I knew I should leave, give him space, but something kept me there, rooted in that room, wishing I could do more. "Do you think—" Ethan's voice broke the silence, low and hesitant. "Do you think I could have done something different? That I could have prevented all of this?" The pain in his words hit me like a blow. He was blaming himself. "No." I responded quickly, my voice firm. "This isn't your fault, Ethan. You trusted her because you loved her. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. He looked at me, surprised by my conviction. For a moment, I thought I had gone too far, but then he let out a heavy sigh, as if releasing a burden he'd been carrying for too long. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft. I think I needed to hear that. I smiled, my heart racing, wanting to say so many things that stayed trapped in my throat. But instead, I just nodded. Because in the end, I was still just the secretary. Just the shoulder he leaned on. And even so, I would continue being everything he needed. Silently. Invisibly. Even if it meant continuing to go unnoticed. I thought I was ready to move on. After weeks of watching Ethan rebuild himself piece by piece, I convinced myself that my role was over. I had been the supportive shoulder, the silent confidant, the constant presence that helped him survive the divorce. And now, he was ready to go on. Without me. Accepting that felt like tearing a piece of myself away. Every gesture I made to help him seemed to have built an invisible wall between us, constantly reminding me that I would never be more than the loyal employee. I had no more hopes. I couldn't keep fooling myself. I needed to leave. I started looking for other jobs, discreetly, without making a fuss. I updated my resume, went to a few interviews, but every time someone asked me why I wanted to leave such a good position, my throat tightened. How could I explain that I was running away from unrequited love? That I was leaving behind not just a job, but a man? The final decision came when I walked into Ethan's office to drop off some documents and found him smiling at his phone. Not just any smile, but one of those genuine smiles that make your eyes light up. I knew it wasn't because of me. It never would be. Maybe he was trying to move on, finding someone new. The thought shattered me. I walked out before he noticed I was there, holding back tears until I reached the bathroom. I leaned against the cold wall, trying to catch my breath as my heart felt like it was breaking. I had to get out of there. I couldn't keep watching him move on while I stayed stuck in the same place. That night, I finalized my resignation letter, rereading every word until I was sure I was doing the right thing. I was going to hand it in the next day. I was going to end the torture of seeing him every day, of longing for something that would never be mine. But Ethan had other plans. I arrived at the office determined to finally end this story, but before I could hand him the letter, he showed up at my desk, his gaze intense enough to completely disarm me. "Are you free tonight?" he asked quickly, as if afraid he'd lose his nerve if he waited a second longer. My mind went blank. Ethan had never invited me anywhere outside of the office. I stared at him, trying to understand what was happening. I think so. Why? He smiled, a genuine smile that made my heart skip a beat. "I want to take you to dinner, to thank you for everything you've done for me. I don't know how I would have gotten through these last few months without you." I felt the air leave my lungs. I was so used to being invisible to him that hearing those words was a shock. My instinct was to decline, to protect my heart before it shattered again. But his eyes were so sincere, so vulnerable, that I couldn't. Sure, I'd love to. And that's how I found myself nervously standing in front of my mirror hours later, trying to decide what to wear. I kept telling myself not to get my hopes up, to remember that it was just a thank you dinner. But my stubborn hope refused to stay silent. What if it was more than that? I chose a simple black dress, elegant enough for dinner, but not too much. When Ethan picked me up at my apartment, I was speechless. He looked stunning, wearing a dark shirt that made his blue eyes stand out, his hair slightly messy in a way that looked casual, but I knew was carefully styled. In the car, he seemed relaxed, smiling easily, without the traces of pain I was so used to seeing. "You look beautiful," he said, so naturally that he almost made me believe it. I tried to control the blush rising to my cheeks. "You don't look too bad yourself," he laughed, the sound warming my chest. I was trying to keep things light, maintain emotional distance, but every smile from him pulled me closer. The restaurant was cozy, with soft lights and quiet music. I was nervous, trying not to read too much into things, trying to convince myself that it was just a casual dinner. But when Ethan looked at me with an intensity I'd never seen before, my defenses started to crumble. We talked for hours. He told me about the challenges of starting over, about the days when he doubted himself, about the fear of not being able to overcome the betrayal. I listened to everything, absorbing every word, every emotion, while my heart broke for him. "You were what kept me going, Olivia," he confessed, his voice low and sincere. "You were there when I thought I had no one left. You were my anchor." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain that being his anchor had destroyed me? That every time I helped him, I lost a little more of myself? But before I could speak, Ethan reached across the table and took my hand, his fingers warm as they wrapped around mine. My heart stopped. "I was so blind," he continued, his eyes holding mine. "I was so blind to what was right in front of me the whole time. I could barely breathe." What do you mean?" He smiled softly, his thumb lightly caressing my hand. "I thought I'd lost everything, but then I realized you were still there. You were always there. I was just too stupid to see how important you are to me." My world spun. I wanted to make sure I wasn't dreaming, that his words were real. "Ethan." My voice came out as a whisper, full of doubts and hopes. He leaned across the table, his eyes never leaving mine. "I've started to see you differently, Olivia. I just don't know how I didn't realize it sooner." The air caught in my lungs as he leaned in closer, his face so close to mine that I could feel his breath. And then he kissed me. It was gentle, delicate, as if he were asking for permission. I melted into his touch, into the warmth of his lips, into the feeling I had waited so long to experience. When he pulled away, his eyes were full of emotions I had never seen before. "I know I'm broken," he admitted, his voice vulnerable. "But I want to try. For you." I smiled, feeling tears burn in my eyes. "I've waited for you for so long." Ethan smiled, his fingers still holding mine. "Then let me prove to you that it was worth the wait."
If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. We need your support.